Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. The Killer Women Vodcast is pleased to be a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. To learn more about Danielle and her books, visit her at www.daniellegirard.com, and to access all of our vodcasts, go to youtube.com/Authors on the Air. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Woman Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with 4 million listeners. I'm your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Sandra Brown. Sandra is the author of 69 New York Times bestsellers, including the #1 Seeing Red. There are over 80 million copies of her books in print worldwide, and her work has been translated into 34 languages. Sandra lives in Texas, and her newest book, Overkill, is out August 16th. Welcome, Sandra.
Well, thank you so much, Danielle. Enjoy being here with you.
Oh, it's such a treat. And then we have to say, because Sandra and I talked about this, that something is going on with her camera today. So she has this beautiful purple tint to her. And actually, it's everybody who's only listening should take a look, because her shirt is actually black. And
it shows up TCU purple. At least it's my alma mater's color, but
exactly.
It's black. So
it's black, and her gorgeous red hair has a little of a purple tint right now as well too. So, and her chair looks purple. So we could not figure out what exactly to do about that. But so we're going to roll with it, which just says, if that doesn't speak grace on Sandra's part right from the get-go, which of course is what we know to expect. I don't know what does. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. First off, wow, let's talk about Overkill. Can you tell our listeners and watchers a little bit about your new book?
Well, Overkill is about a NFL football player, Super Bowl MVP, and he gets some terrible news dumped on him right away. And as it turns out, through legal loopholes and a set of circumstances of which he is unaware, he is still the medical power of attorney on his ex-wife who suffers an assault, an attack, and is, for all intents and purposes, brain dead. And he is still the one having to make the decision whether or not to pull the plug, to put it cruelly. And so this kind of, upsets his life, needless to say. And it goes downhill from there. That's the bright part of the story.
It really, and to make it really clear, right? This isn't like it was like a long-term marriage. I mean, yeah. Right? It was
a 10-month marriage, very volatile. Yes. And they were the celebrity couple. They were the fodder for, think if Kim Kardashian and Tom Brady got married. That would be about like it would be.
Yeah.
They had this tumultuous divorce, scorched earth divorce, I think I called it in something. And now he hadn't even seen her in 5 years. And he gets brought into this terrible moral dilemma, not of his making, right, and has to act on it with the whole world watching, by the way.
Well, that's what makes it so interesting, is that this, such a, like you said, it's a moral and personal, it'd be a horrible dilemma for anybody. But of course, the media is going to slay him no matter what he does, because that's what the media does best. So,
and not only the media, but whatever decision he makes, it's going to provoke an opinion from everyone. Right. And so whether you would be for him doing it, be merciful, or if you are, for reasons of religion or whatever stance you have, is so diametrically opposed to doing it, to taking a human life when it's not sanctioned. And so no matter what decision he makes, it's a lose-lose. It's going to offend a great number of people.
Exactly.
And he's under the microscope, with a spotlight on it. So,
and to make matters more interesting, right? We have the man who committed this assault, who's now just getting out of prison after a very, very short stint.
Right.
Considering sort of his crime. And one of the things that I thought is super interesting is this book is based on an aspect of criminal law that I did not know about.
Mm-hmm.
We all know about double jeopardy, of course, that you can't be tried for the same crime twice. But but Overkill features another, and I don't know if there's a term for the law that it talks about.
Yeah, I came across a year and a day rule, and it was kind of this standing common law that if someone lived a year and a day beyond an attack, then the culprit was off the hook. And but only in the past few decades have people said, wait, this is not right. And it came up so recently with the Hinckley, when Hinckley was released from prison for shooting James Brady and incapacitating him for the rest of his life. And when he was released, a lot of the Brady family and his estate got up in arms, and they said, wait a minute, he died as a consequence of this. His health continued to deteriorate until he ultimately succumbed. And so that attack was the reason for it. But this law that they could go after an attacker after a year and a day had not gone into effect when that crime was committed. So Hinckley did not have to face any further charges. So it's very recent in terms of turning it around. And I don't really know if there was a legal term. I didn't come across a legal term. It was just that person can be tried or charged and tried for another crime, a more severe crime.
Right, like murder, right? Like murder. And I thought that was really interesting.
Manslaughter,
Yeah, right, exactly. No, you're right. Absolutely right. Of course, crime novelists, we have to know the difference between manslaughter and murder. That's absolutely right. So this is so as this is this how the idea came to you? You sort of read about a year and a day, or?
Yes, you probably know as novelists yourself, you start with one thing, and then when you start researching, you find out all of these other tangential things. And it's like, gosh, that's really interesting. I didn't even know that aspect of it, but I'll certainly use it. And so what got me thinking about the idea in the first place was during COVID. And when families were being, just tortured into having to make the ultimate decision about a loved one who might not have had good odds of recovery, having to be taken off a ventilator that could possibly save the life of a child of someone who didn't suffer other health, problems. And I just thought, gosh, what a dire decision to have to make, and under any circumstances, but certainly that. And so that really got me thinking, and then about that circumstance to begin with, and then to make it worse, to be doing that in a public spotlight. If you were a celebrity, if everybody knew your name, if the president of the United States was having to make that kind of decision, if he was charged with making medical decisions for his wife or his children or whatever, what would you do? What would you do? Or if you were just a normal human being that, didn't have a high public profile, it would be bad enough. But if you were a celebrity and everybody in the world knew what you were doing at any given time, then you would be making such a horrible decision in a public arena.
Well, that's what I love. It's like so clear how your brilliant mind is working here, right? You found it. No, I think I want to follow it through, because it's so illuminating to see sort of inside that head. You found a scenario that would be devastating for all of us. and then you said, what would make it worse is
Right.
if our main character who has to make the decision is a public figure. What would make it worse is if the marriage was really short and kind of miserable, and he didn't, it wasn't somebody,
He didn't like her.
he didn't even like her at the end.
Right.
So I thought that is just, what a great example of how, a really successful book ratchets up all the places to make the stakes as high as they can be.
Well, and then the herald of the bad news, who is Kate Lennon, the state prosecutor who wants to go after the attacker who's been let out of jail, is not someone, it wasn't some unattractive old man that Zach would never, he would say, get lost, whatever. And even if he agreed with him legally, that would be the end of the problem. But to compound his problem, he calls her an angel-faced herald of hell,
right?
And she does, she's very attractive, and they have this immediate chemistry that both try to fight. So while they're trying to fight the villain of the book, they're also fighting their own attraction, which is a little beyond the pale, but it's either ethical or it's not. And
right.
It's like you can't be a little pregnant, you're either pregnant or you're not. And so it's, so now they're confronted with, how do we handle this while we're trying to deal with all these other issues? So,
right. And we talk about it like, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Their attraction becomes public too. So
yes, it does. And they have that. Well, and not only is she, attractive and young, she's so bright, right? She is a force to be reckoned with. So she's not going to be pushed off of her purpose easily. And the what, the sort of what you're, one of the many things you're famous for is that sexual tension. I get shivers actually just as soon as I said that. From the very first time they meet, right? It is like, oh boy. And he had one bad marriage. He has not gotten involved with, women after that. He's definitely been like, that did not go well. I'm not doing this again. So, and she's like, I'm a professional. This is what I got to do. So of course neither is a willing participant.
Each is the other's worst nightmare.
Yes, exactly. And again, that's what makes everything, so fun to follow through. So, I want to hear about your process, because I mean, you're thinking about, I first of all, I think there's a Thriller Fest, I think before the COVID, that I was sitting with a group of authors, and I think it was Steve Barry, and it was a mutual admiration. We were all admiring Sandra Brown. And I think he was saying that you literally work 11 months, you only take 1 month off a year, and the rest of the time you are working.
Just about, yeah.
And so do you work, is it a Monday through Friday? You're in the office sort of like how do you structure your time?
Well, when I first started writing, I had little kids at home, and I celebrated big time when both of them got into elementary school for a full day, and so I would start as soon as I got home from taking them to school at 8:30, and then I'd write like with a frenzy until 3:30. And then I had to become, put on a different cap, and it was soccer mom, choir mom, dance class, scouts, whatever they were into at the time. And, but I compressed the time I had. I thought I've got to write, before I become mom, and I have to cook dinner and get baths and all that other stuff.
We all know those stories. Yes, we do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, I think because of that, I structure my day still. I'm not an early riser. These people that get up at 4:30 in the morning and write till 8:37, I don't even get them. I just totally do not get that, because I'm not a morning person. But I kind of structured my day, around the school day, because that's for how many years I had to write. And so I go to work. I do have an off. I'll explain that in a minute. This is my new home. this room has not been decorated yet. So I just put props in the background to make
it looks fabulous from where we are.
And then I turned purple. But anyway, I do have an office at home, and when this room is redone, it will be a study library office officially. But I also have kept an office outside the home, and I have 2 employees, and they do everything but write the books. But I go to work every day. I go to work. I physically go to work every day. And that started because so many people did not take it officially. You know, they would call friends, even family, and what are you doing? Well, I'm writing. Oh, and then they proceed to talk for 30 minutes, you know, whereas if I'd been a nurse or if I had been a lawyer, they wouldn't have walked into the courtroom and said, I need to tell you something about, you know, the dinner on Friday night. It wouldn't have happened. But when you're working at home and you're a writer, it's like, well, she could do that anytime, you know? And so I thought, you know what, if I get an office, that's going to make it look so much more official. So I did. And I've been working out of an office then ever since. It was about 3 years into my career. I went to work every day.
It's smart. You got dressed. There's something also about getting dressed, right?
Yeah. I got so lazy during COVID because, you know, you could wear your jammies and for the first 2 months of it, I was even away from home. I had gone to, I have a place in South Carolina that I just kind of retreat and write. And I got stuck there. I couldn't get home because it was a 2-day drive. So I would have had to stay in a hotel along the way. And that was when everybody was saying, don't go to a hotel. I couldn't fly because they were canceling all the flights. So I just stayed for 2 months in the house by myself. I got my groceries delivered. And I wrote a lot. During that period of time, but I would find, you know, I just shuffle around in my pajamas all day. And it was like, what difference does it make? You know, what is seeing me? So
exactly.
I think we all kind of got lazy during that period of time.
But I do wonder, like, so how was that different? Like in some ways, you know, like you said, you had more time than you normally would have had. But were you, you know, does it take a schedule to kind of help you with your productivity? Or did you find you were still able to just put the hours in and do it exactly the way you would do it at home? And you're a professional, you've been doing this so long. But when
I don't really set myself such a rigid schedule. I do go to work every day, but you know what it's like. You're doing things like this. You're doing business, and I don't enjoy the business. So when I get, you know, things that I have to pay attention to, stop the creative process and deal with something business wise, I really kind of am stingy because I really want to just be doing the play like. I really want to be doing the make-believe stuff, not the real stuff. And anything that draws me out of the story and gets me away from the story, I kind of resent, you know, in a way. But then the business is essential, and I'm so grateful for it. It's you know, a hazard, but you have to deal with it, and I do it with, you know, without as grudgingly as I can possibly be. But if I don't write but, you know, 5 pages in a day, but they were damn hard to write, then I let up on myself for not writing 10. And sometimes 10 pages can happen in just a few hours. And then sometimes 10 pages takes 4 days. It just depends on, you know, the scene I'm trying to write. And when I'm doing the first draft, if I know it's not perfect, I've forced myself to go on. Leave it there. It's there. It's something you can play with, because I rewrite every scene. I don't know how many times. Sometimes it'll be 3 or 4. Sometimes it'll be 12.
And it shows in your final draft. And I was going to say, actually, you know, there's so many thoughts in my head, but while we're talking about that, I guess I wanted to say, I know that I've watched some interviews and read some stuff. It sounds like you're not really a plotter. you sort of listen to the characters about what they say to do. So sometimes the hard pages are because the story, the characters aren't really talking about where they're going?
They're standing there looking at me like, what do we, you're the one that's supposed to tell us what to do, and I'm going to do something, say something so I can write it down, because I really do kind of put them in a situation, and I see it as though they're actors in a play. Yeah. And when one of them walks over to the chair and slumps into it, that's what I write down. But then, of course, you have to abide by the rules of storytelling. You do have to abide by the rules of plotting. And so it sounds kind of cavalier to say, oh, just write down what they hear and say, what I hear them say and do. But it goes beyond that, because you have to have certain, or at least I have to have certain peaks in the story. And I know when I'm approaching, I call it like the 125-page flip. Mm-hmm. And it's up to that point, the protagonist has been protesting the call to action.
Yeah.
No. And they're lining up all these reasons why, no, I'm not doing it. I don't want to get involved. But something has to happen at about page 100, 125, where there has to be a flip in their thinking. And they say, well, okay, I'll give it a try, still doubting that they can, overcome whatever problem it is. So, and then there's another peak that comes halfway through the book where the reader's going one way and all of a sudden it's a reversal, So all of these things I try and build in when I'm kind of sort of plotting. I think, okay, this would be a good first turnaround. This would be a good second turnaround. This is when everything goes to hell in a handbasket. And then this is when, he or she figures a way to overcome it. So I kind of know the rules of plotting and I apply them. But when I sit down to write, even if I've written out a synopsis or an outline, I never look at it again. Because at that point in time, I think if these people aren't real enough to figure out their own problem, then they don't deserve to be on the page.
That is right. That is great. How do we, and you do, and that's another, you do that.
Enough, are they clever enough to work this out? And if they're not that interesting, then they don't need to be there.
Well, so let's talk about, your finished product. Because the idea that you would, say, okay, this is what the scene is, supposed to accomplish. It's down. I'm not exactly happy with it. Right. It's not done. And then you go back and sort of revise. And I think I also heard you say you sort of, when you, start sometimes, a new day or new part, you go back again and sort of work through whatever had been written before. So you're one of those sort of, you go over it and over and over it. And one of the things I think is so impressive is that, for somebody who has published, 80 million copies in print, we watch these sort of big time authors, like yourself. And a lot of times as the books, we get further down in their career, the books get a little bit, and I'm not to be, I'm not criticizing, but I am criticizing, I suppose, but not anybody specifically. But I noticed that sometimes the books get a little bit less tight. The work, it's not as fabulous and as some of those early books. And I always wonder, is that because editors think, well, I'm not going to edit, Sandra Brown. She's this massive star. I'm just going to let, her work go through. But your books are as sharp, as, tight, and the characters as sort of on point as they've always been. So what's the trick to not being like, well, I'm going to sell 1 million copies of this book. So, why do I need to work so hard?
If there's a trick, the trick, it's a technique that I apply, and that is to challenge myself to do something different with each book, build in something I've never done before. And it can come, sometimes it is intentional, sometimes other times it just comes organically, and I'll go, oh, I've never done this, and it's hard to do. Why is this so hard? And then think, because I've never exactly done this before. But I think the worst thing that can happen to an author is to start believing in their own success. I scale a wall of fear every single day I come to the keyboard, that I won't have another sentence, I won't have another idea, I won't have another interesting character. And every day it's as if I'm doing it for the first time. And it scares me to death that everybody's going to find out that it's a fluke, that I'm an imposter. So I really have that imposter complex. But and it's something I have to work on, because if I don't, then it just completely overwhelms me, and then I get paralyzed. But so I look at the wall of the bookcases that aren't up yet, because I've only lived here for 3 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
I'll look at the bookcases and I'll think, okay, I've done this. In the case of Overkill, I've done this 84 times. I know how to do this, but when I start book 85 in a few weeks from now, I will be sitting here going, I don't know how to do this. And I think any author worth their salt truly would have to admit on some level, I don't know how I do it. Right. You know, because you're asked every day, how do you get the ideas? I don't know where they come from. If I knew, that's what I'd sell. I wouldn't have to sit here 11 months of the year and write. I could just sell that, and it would be the fairy dust, you know. But I think every author, if they're really honest with their reader and with their audience or whatever, and with themselves, it's like, you don't really know where you got this. You can apply a name to it, like talent, instinct, a vivid imagination, certainly, all of that. But then also it takes a certain kind of person to isolate themselves and to put words on paper. I don't know a shortcut. I've been doing it for a long time, over 40 years. I don't know a shortcut to sitting down and putting one word at a time on paper, you know. And so to anyone out there who might be listening and aspires to write, be willing to work your butt off. It's hard.
It's hard work. Well, I want to repeat that. So when you say, you know, when Sandra Brown says every day she scales a wall of fear, it's an absolute true phenomenon. And if, you know, I think, well, you know, I published 15 books. I know what I'm doing, but I'm glad to hear that when I get to 80, I don't know that I'll get there, Sandra, but if I got to 85, then that is exactly where you are. You just think, because it's a little bit of magic. I believe that the sort of where those ideas come from and how the voices in your head get you to the end.
You asked me about, you know, how do you keep the writing fresh? And I said there was something I had to do. In this particular book, I knew I wanted to write about the moral dilemma. How do I write a book like that and still make it a novel of suspense and give it that thriller aspect? How can I build in that ticking clock, you know, that a thriller has to have? So merging those two types of reads was my challenge on this. So I had two antagonists. I had Evan, who was vile, but he was really kind of a personification of the real villain of the story, which was Zach's conscience.
Right.
That's the real villain of the story, because he has to wrestle with this dilemma that he's in. And because of, you know, all of the pressures from all different sides, even from Kate saying, if you really want to get this guy, if you want him to, then the irony is you've got to kill her. And so, so the real villain, if you just peel away all of the other stuff, is Zach's own conscience. And I think that that is what the reader will more identify with, because if a reader, if anybody was in Zach's position, that's what you would be fighting.
Right.
That's what
and
you
that's
would
in
fight.
little ways, we fight that battle all the time, us against ourselves, about,
Right.
all sorts of decisions we make that are not, of course, nearly, but it's not just Eben who was our attacker, who is, like you said, absolutely vile. He had several accomplices who are also, different levels of gray morality wise. And the woman, his ex-wife's father is a
Right.
big part of the story. And, he has his own agenda, of course. It's so interesting. I mean, I think you're really right. Because this could have been a very sort of slow, agonizing story about, because this woman's been on life support for 4 years. It's not like it just happened.
Yeah. So it would have, I had to figure out how to merge those two, to give it energy, to give it propulsion. It couldn't just be him sitting there, staring into his whiskey going, I don't know what to do, because we've all been there too.
Right. Yes.
But I mean, it had to have the action. It had to have, the action and the real clear and present danger, and the ticking clock. And the clock kept changing, but it was a next ticking clock, and then the next ticking clock, and so on. So
yeah. And that it works. I mean, and Eben, thankfully for Eben, he's, now that he's out of jail, also we have this sort of, what's that guy going to do? Is he going to get involved? Because if he, if this woman dies, then his life is in a bit of a pickle too.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
He was feeling the pressure too.
Yes. The pressure, and that's the sign of a really well done thriller, right? The pressure's on everybody, and it's on Kate because she's is interested in this man who clearly she shouldn't be involved with because of his involvement in this case. She wants to get this bad guy. She's got her own life story, right? I mean, she's got her own stuff, and so everybody's feeling the pressure, which of course all centers back on poor Zach, who's like, I just want to live in my mountain house.
And pull the covers over my head. I love the line that Bing is his former coach. And in the story, he's the archetypal mentor. And I loved when he says to Zach, you caved like a rookie. And that is what Zach had done. And this angel-faced herald of hell comes to him and says, it ain't over yet. You're not out of it yet. And that's his worst nightmare. Right. That's the worst thing that could happen to him. And I really love the way that Bing said, and he said that. I didn't make that up.
I know, I love it when you say that.
And he said, you caved like a rookie. And that would be something that a former coach, would say. And but he put it, I mean, he hit the nail on the head. Zach had retreated. It was a sort of an act of cowardice. I mean, he was also deferring to her parents, and that was a kindness. And there was another reason, which we won't disclose here, why he backed off the decision. But then he goes and hides for 5 years, until Kate shows up and says, you ain't out of this yet,
And you do such you must be a football fan, because you do such a beautiful job of, really, because a football player, like, and being, of course, as that mentor, who's also another wonderful character, they have a language that people talk, when they're in that business, and you feel that really threaded through the analogies, and just, that's what the language that how they communicate, and so beautifully done. So I'm guessing you're a football fan.
Football fan. I was raised on football, and I'm a big fan. And the season starts soon, just within weeks. So that
is so exciting. So I have a question for you, because like you said, 40 years. I can't believe you obviously started writing before you got out of diapers, because but basically, when you started in this business, and even when I started, my first book came out in 2000. It felt like a very different business. It felt I imagine, even more so, male dominated, right? I mean, so how different does it feel to you, sort of, for female authors who are starting now, or how your books are edited and received now versus what it was like when you started?
Well, there's still, I feel it not so much from publishers or editors, because I've worked with both male and female editors, and I've always, had just been blessed with fantastic editors. But I feel it not even so much from people within the industry now as I do with readers. And I still have readers who say, well, I've never read one of your books. I don't read stuff like that. And it'll be like, well, how do you know, if you've never read one, what it is like?
Right.
And they get a misconception. They see the cover on the back of the book. They see, this Southern woman that talks like I do. And it's like, well, she can't know anything about, men and how well, most of my books are now written from the male point of view, it kind of changed when I went on the USO tour, the first USO tour. Yeah. And I learned, so it was really gratifying and validating that so many of the male service members were the first in line, to have me sign their books. And so it was like, if soldiers and Marines and airmen can read my books, then, any macho guy should be able to. But I find I'm growing, and I have been doing over the past, decade or so, more male readers. But there was a built-in prejudice, and especially because I started with bona fide romances, writing from a romance series. That, they think, well, it's all that mushy stuff. And even then, after they read it, they're like, I thought you were such a nice girl.
Right. That is so funny. And that is exactly right. Because here you are with this.
And I'm always coming back with, would you say that to me if a man had written that? So it's still that gender thing is always going to be there. And I frankly like the gender thing. I frankly enjoy that there's still male, female, this chemistry, this, as you said, the tension and the attraction. And so I enjoy reading it. I enjoy writing it. And if you don't, then don't read me, read somebody else.
But at least give it a try, right? I mean,
don't categorically say that's not my kind of book.
Right. And I the good news, I guess, is that women buy 85% of all books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I bet there are a lot of closet male readers out there, that don't want to admit it.
This is, like you said, this is a very, this is a very thriller-esque. There's nothing overtly feminine about, these covers, and there's nothing, that you write men who feel masculine, which I think is important. I think I understand the perspective from a man who's like, I don't want to read about, a man who sounds like a woman, but in the same way, all the, we don't want to read women who sound like.
Yeah. I like to keep, the gender very well defined, and I guess that's still, I can't speak to everyone. That's still my fantasy. It's still that's still my fantasy. So that's where I started, and I like the love story built in, but it has to be a really difficult love story. It can't be immediate. They've got issues they have to work out.
That's right. Well, and also this is not a woman this is not a traditional, in the sense of the 50s style housewife.
Oh, yeah, no, she's no June Cleaver. No. And none of my heroines is. None. I like them to be, assertive confident. They have their own initiative. They have their own goals, passions, and I don't think your character has to be interesting to the reader, And now, if she's a housewife that chops up her husband and puts him in the freezer, then she's interesting.
Okay, well, so I heard you say that you started writing kind of on a dare from your husband.
Yeah, my husband at the time. Yeah.
Tell us about, I mean, so this is, you guys, tell me about that, that situation, and how has your marriage evolved as you become this, massive success?
Well, I am divorced now, but it was my husband, Michael. I had been fired from my job, and he said, "You've got time and opportunity now to do what you've always said you wanted to do, and that was to write fiction. So you can either keep talking about it or you can actually do it." And it was more or less in the form of a dare. And I thought, if not now, when? And I did have the 2 kids at home, baby. I mean, they were like toddlers. And, but it was also kind of kind of a proving ground, that I had lost my job, and it was like, success is its own revenge. And I thought, if I got a book published, then
they'd be sorry.
Rights, So but I did not know I could do it until I started, and then I really knew I couldn't do it without doing my homework. And I read up on how to write fiction. I read Dean Koontz's book on how to write fiction. I got books out of the library, college professor, creative writing class books, textbooks, and learned there were things like plotting. And as I talked about, the elements and the archetypes that have to be in every story, and you're not even aware of them. They just kind of emerge out of the plot, and they emerge out of my subconscious. But so I had an instinct for it, but it still had to be honed. It still had to be put in a way that would be marketable. Couldn't just be because a story, an oral story is completely different from a written story. And what you're thinking up is hard to get from here to your fingertips. It's hard to get from here to the keyboard.
I sometimes wish we could just put a chord in there.
Right.
Just download it. Well, one of the things since you started with toddlers, one of the things I think is really interesting and so useful as a writer is to realize when you only have a little bit of amount of time, which, my first book came out when my daughter was 8 months old. If you only have, a half an hour, sometimes it was all you had was a half an hour. But you carry the story around with you, right? When you're not at your computer, the story is still sort of spooling in your brain.
Right. And I was on a typewriter.
I bet you're a fast typist.
This is before computers. I wrote my first 7 books on a typewriter because I couldn't afford a computer, and computers were as big as, this room. And so when I got my first one, it was this big clunky, thing. The printer was over here, and then had the tower that you had to feed something in. It was, I don't even remember all of it, but so I was on a typewriter. But one of my stories of early on, I had taken my kids to the circus, and we were sitting there, and they had their popcorn, cotton candy, whatever, and I got this inspiration for a story, and I took out my checkbook, and that was the only piece of paper that I had, and a ballpoint pen, and I was sitting there and I was filling up the check, with notes, and I brought it home, and I always said I plotted a story, during the circus. But I can remember when they were little, they would come in, they would be talking to me, and they would say, "Mom, you're thinking," and they knew that I was writing dialogue even while they were trying to tell me something, so, and I still kind of go into a fog. And sometimes I'll walk, from one room to another, and I'll go, yeah, that'd be a good line. And I'll rush back, to the computer and type it down before it leaves me, So I think every writer has that schizophrenia.
I think it is a form of schizophrenia, isn't it? Yeah. And you mentioned this also about, like, sort of the idea that you get to when the sort of book is going and everything is working your way, that you sort of almost write as a stream of consciousness, that
Right.
it's sort of divorced from your mind. Is there like a way that some people say, oh, like candles or a certain space? Is there a way how do you make that happen?
I do. I like candles. Got one right here. Plants. You referred to the purple flowers, which are indeed purple. It's just my shirt and my hair are not purple, but the flowers are. I always have something living on my desk. It's an ivy. It's cut flowers. It's always something growing, and then I always have my bottle of water and my scented candle. I'm a real creature comfort kind of person. So even in my office, it's in an old home, and so I have an upstairs bedroom that is now my office. It's full of bookcases and everything. It looks like an office now, but it's actually, the building itself is an old home. So I like that secure feeling, not clinical, but all the things that I love. And I'm a very tactile person. So I usually have a wrap on because I'm always cold.
Yeah. I always find I like to have my office, the house is, I like it to be like 68, but my office, I like to be like 75. But there's something to the ritual, right? Yeah. Your brain smells the candle and feels the wrap and the heat of the room and the flowers or whatever, and it said, okay, now this is my time. This is my time to work.
Yeah. Well, I had COVID about a month ago, and I'd had all of it was the lightest case. I was so grateful.
Yeah.
The lightest case possible. I'd had all my shots and everything. So it was just 10 days at home, and I told my editor, I said, but no worry, I'm going to spend that 10 days working. And he said, well, you can't work when you've got COVID. And I said, no, daydreaming. That's 99% of the job is daydreaming. So I sat, in the house by myself in my pajamas every day, just staring out the window, daydreaming, trying to come up with a story. So, but I think 99% of our job is just, you have to think it up. You have to make something of nothing. And then sometimes a character will say a word of dialogue or something, and I'll be like, who said that? What are the circumstances? Who put these people here? And I will see a scene and I'll just start writing it. 2 books like that come to mind. Sting. I saw these 2 guys in the bar, and one of them says to the other, so a woman walks into a bar, and I heard him say that, and I thought, well, he was about to tell a joke, and that's what the character turned out to be the hero said, is this a joke? I've heard this joke. And he said, no, the woman just walked into the bar. And so it was a woman that they were waiting on to walk into the, but she didn't know they were waiting on him. And then Thick as Thieves. I saw this scene where they start standing in this ditch around a bag of money, and they start talking, and they say the easiest way to get caught is to talk about it. And I thought, who said that? And what are the circumstances? And I just started writing these scenes, having no idea where the story was going to go. So sometimes it's just, I hear people in my head. And I had an imaginary friend when I was growing up. My mother tells me her name was Charlotte, and she went everywhere with me. I disciplined her, fed her, diapered her, everything. So I still have imaginary friends.
Have you written Charlotte's story? I'd be curious.
No. Charlotte disappeared before I could really remember her, but yeah, I've heard the stories about her.
I love that you, because of course both of those books I've read and are wonderful, and I know exactly what scenes you're talking about. It's interesting to me that you can then take that. So you take that, and then it's a matter of really staring out the window until you figure out what part of a story are you looking at.
How can I use this? Yeah. And it's like a combination lock. I play with it, mold it, keep switching it around. Well, what if this? Well, what if this? Or what if this character's the hero? No, this has to be or what if she's the heroine? How are they going to be at cross purposes, and start doing all that. There comes a moment, and I call it the aha. And I can think of all these great scenes, I'll have it seen here and I'll have a scene here and I'll have a scene here, but it doesn't hang together. What's the one thing that I know that the reader doesn't know?
Mm-hmm.
And when I get that is the thread from which all of this other stuff hangs. And when I get that gathering thread, it's the aha moment when I go, that's it. That's the thing I know that the reader doesn't. Mm-hmm. And if you finished Overkill, you know what that is.
I do. Yes, I do.
The very end of the book. And then it everything else has hinged on that one thing.
It's that it changes everything again right at the end. And you are a master of that. So do you have these, does it ever happen that you have this, imagine this conversation, this scene, you write it down and then you can't nothing happens. You can't get the aha moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes ideas don't want to become a story, mm-hmm. and they just don't. They just languish there. And I think, okay, my publisher's got a calendar and he's got a big red circle on the date this book is at. So I've got to think up something fast. I was in the middle of writing one, not in the middle. I probably had 12 or 15 chapters maybe, which is a pretty good start. But mm-hmm. I had started one. It just wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't exciting. I wasn't intrigued at all. And I was sitting at home watching TV one night, and all of a sudden I saw this woman running down this snowy landscape in her running tights. She's working out, and something terrible happens, didn't know what. And she wakes up alone in this mountain cabin with this tall, dark, handsome stranger. And I thought, whew, this is going somewhere, and so I got so excited. And the next morning I put aside those other 10 chapters, whatever it was, and sat down and started writing that scene where she's running. And then the next thing she knows, she's got, temporary amnesia. And that's how I wrote Mean Streak. It started with that. And then when I got into it, I realized I had gone 4 or 5 chapters and I hadn't given him a name. He didn't have a name. And so I thought, this is that thing that I said, it'll keep me on my toes. I thought, how long can I go without giving the hero a name? And it went 3/4 of the book before we ever learned his name or what he was about. And so that was a fun book to write. I liked the setting, and of course I got really energized then once I had this new thing, and it was interesting to me, it was compelling to me, and so that other book just never got finished. But I went on to something better. It didn't want to be a story. This one did.
Yeah. Well, 12 to 15 chapters is quite a bit. So the fact that you knew, that's the other part of all of this is knowing as an experienced writer when something isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Because I think
when to give it up.
Yeah, people keep forcing it. And I think you can tell, right? You can tell when a book really, it wasn't.
Bored, the reader's certainly going to be bored. So I'm a pretty good gauge because I'm a reader first.
Yeah.
And I read as many hours a day as I write. And so if I'm not engaged in my own story, if my palms aren't sweaty, if I'm not getting turned on by that first kiss, if if the villain is not repelling me, then the reader is going to have those same reactions. Right. And I also trust my editors. They're the first reader, and if they say, "Gosh, it was great, it was great, it was great," there was just one thing, there was one point, and so they said, "It's up to you. You can change." And I go, "Well, why would I?" Because you're the first reader, other than myself. And if you picked up on it, you represent, a lot of people. So I listen to my editors too.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And they're an important part of this process. Writing in a vacuum is really not helpful, right?
And it's scary too.
Yeah, I think having your editor be your first reader sounds scary to me. But you guys have obviously a really close relationship. But
well, I am. It is scary to me because I think, what if I'm way off here and it's just awful, So that wall of fear.
Yes, that wall of fear that you are still climbing, but I appreciate that. I think it does make you honest, and it keeps your standards very high, which is why, you have, 80, I guess only 84, 69 New York Times bestsellers.
Over 83, no, sorry, 73 New York Times bestsellers.
Oh, we got to update that.
Overkill is book number 84. So I've been at it.
73 New York Times bestsellers. That is, yeah. Well, people who haven't, if there's any men out there who've said they don't read this kind of thing, I hope they're going to now try a Sandra Brown, and then they're going to have a really big backlist, because this is not a female. I mean, you're a female author, but this is not a female book. Although I don't even know what that means. So that sort of seems
right. That's exactly right. Why should it be the determining factor? It shouldn't be.
Yeah, if that's somebody's determining factor, they're missing out on a lot of really good fiction written by women, which is why we're here. So, okay, Sandra, this has been amazing. You're fabulous. Tell us what's next. Once people devour Overkill, what are you working on now?
I have no idea. Right now, I'm working on, how it goes. The build up to publication is a busy time too. It's our Christmas season, right? And so I've been doing a lot of course, I took downtime after I finished, and then I had some. I moved, and so I've been waiting for an idea to strike. But in the meantime, doing all of the stuff that leads up to publication and everything. So as soon as I get back from tour, which will be a couple of weeks, I'll start getting serious about it.
It'll happen. I have total trust that idea is out there for you. So is your process, so, are you on an annual?
Yeah. And I'm pleased to say I just got another 3-book contract from my publisher. Overkill was the third in a 3-book deal. So now I've got 3 more years, but and they would love for me to do more than 1 book a year, but this is a good pace for me, because I never want to short shrift a story just in order to make a deadline, and I've got such an extensive backlist that it would also be almost cannibalistic. It would be, if there's such a plethora to choose from, then I think you're not giving focus to the book that's in your computer. And so if people are running out of a Sandra Brown, there are a lot of Sandra Brown 3. And so it's a good pace. It keeps me from getting lazy. I have to, I get under pressure. And I work better under pressure, a little bit of pressure. But also, I think I would still, if I had 2 to write, I'd cave like a rookie. I feel like I would feel so much pressure that I wouldn't get the joy out of the storytelling. And it's the best job in the world. Yeah, I mean, if it were easy, everybody would do it, because it's a great job. We get to make believe for a living. And I love it. I love it. Now, I couldn't have done it for all these years if I didn't just love it. It's too hard.
It is the best. It is the best job.
Really for it. You really do.
Yeah, you have to love it. But also, I think, so you must write pretty quickly, because if we're going to have another book out, so that works to your advantage, to your skill set. Is it you?
This time next year, there will be a new one. I deliver early spring. Yeah. So it's a pretty short turnaround.
Well, the other thing to say about, your one book a year is that this isn't one of those sort of, these are hefty books. Your books are not, sort of one singular plot thing that twists. A lot of suspense now is 280 pages long. Your books are beefy.
Right.
And you need a year. I say you keep your year. I'm all for that.
Well, thank you.
Well, Sandra, I have to thank you so much for being here today. You are, I'm such a huge fan, and you are such an incredible role model for providing fabulous stories that we want to read over and over. And now there are just a million of them. So thank you so much for being here.
Much for having me. I'm sorry about the color discoloration, but we tried, and
we did, and we know what you look like, right? There you are, fabulous. Your red hair. It's funny to be on the. So it does. It's a slightly different tint today, but you know what? You are a stunner, and you're in purple. Purple is a great color on you. I guess you can go away with. In case you need a change. But thank you so much for joining me.
Well, it was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the Killer Women podcast today with Sandra Brown, and I'm Danielle Girard, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.